Well, greetings, everybody. I've got an interesting guest on today who's actually pointed something out to me which I hadn't spotted, and I don't know whether you spotted it. It's the Reverend Christopher Wickland, and some of you may be familiar with his work, but he's flagged up to me, and I do thank him for it, the Supreme Court's decision in Northern Ireland, which is always a little bit on the back burner when it comes to the mainland, when it comes to these things, suggesting, or ruling, I should say, that teaching Christianity in schools, i.e., religious instruction, whatever it is, whatever you call it, whatever you had at school, whatever I had at school, is somehow indoctrination, which is quite the most bizarre thing I think I've ever seen. As I am not an expert in any of this field yet, but I'm going to make myself an expert by the time Christmas is gone, so I know exactly what I'm talking about, and I can punish those people who need punishing. Reverend Christopher, well, Chris, tell us all about it if you'd be so kind, because I'm quite sure everybody else is as ignorant as I am.
Yeah, so this went on the news yesterday. What's the date today? Is it 20th or the 19th? Well, where were we at today?
I think it's 20, yeah, 20th, I think.
The 20th of November. So it came out yesterday on the 19th of November, and it just came out as a headline on GB News, and they mentioned it, and nothing more was said of it. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was the Supreme Court had ruled in favor of an incident in Northern Ireland where a parent wanted their child taken out of Christian religious education of an RE lesson because they felt they were being deemed it was being indoctrinated. And so this went to court, and eventually it went to the UK Supreme Court, and the court ruled in their favor. So I looked into this, and basically the Supreme Court, which is based here in Britain, has unanimously ruled in favor of, which was a non-religious father and his child, that the exclusive or the exclusivity Christian teaching of religious education and collective worship in Northern Ireland are to be deemed indoctrination. And this is therefore discriminatory under human rights law. And this ruling will have, as you can imagine, wide-ranging implications for the teaching of RE in Northern Ireland and for collective worship across the United Kingdom. Now, what I find quite, well, beyond the pale on this particular issue is that our children are being taught and told that they can be a different gender to what they're born. Some schools are teaching that they can have up to 100 genders, if not more. We have children that can potentially be given puberty blockers so that they can become the sex that they desire. If that's more akin to indoctrination rather than telling people that, Christianity teaches that in the beginning it was God, and then God made Adam and Eve, and from there came, all the human race. And so this is essentially what this case is resting on. It says the case is known as JR 87, really sexy title there. And the original judgment in the High Court of Northern Ireland, the case started in 2022, was that religious education and collective worship are not conveyed in an objective, critical, or pluralistic manner in Northern Ireland schools. However, the Northern Ireland Department of Education, they appealed at the Court of Appeals last year in October, and it ruled that while the religious education curriculum was not objective, critical, or pluralistic, this was not sufficient to conclude that there had been a breach of human rights law, as this didn't amount to indoctrination. The court also ruled that the right to withdraw was not stigmatizing, and Northern Ireland humanists intervened in the case. So again, they're trying to put upon religion that it must be objective, critical, pluralistic. I mean, I would actually object and say that actually good teaching of Christianity is objective. It is critical. I wouldn't say it was pluralistic, but it's like saying where humanists would say there is no God, but they're only looking through the world, the lens, through materiality. But what if God is not based on materiality? What if God transcends materiality? Surely, if God is God, he transcends the material universe. And so we're judging things pertaining to theology. We're judging things on God based on a certain mindset or a certain way of thinking or a certain form of indoctrination or ideology, which is essentially humanism or secularism. So the father of the child appealed this decision and took it to the Supreme Court, which has now ruled that a curriculum not being objective, critical, or pluralistic in its being indoctrinating are two sides of the same coin. The court also ruled that the human right of withdrawal is clearly stigmatizing in a context where no other children are withdrawn. Parents having a reasonable apprehension of such stigma is sufficient enough to mean they do not have to actually withdraw their child. So they're basically saying even the stigma of removing a child from a lesson, what a terrible thing that they have to live with. So again, it's quite clear that the humanists, their agenda is really not about how Christianity is taught. Humanists just dislike Christianity. It's interesting they haven't mentioned, and I'm not sure how far this expands to, whether it expands to Islam and other religions, because I'd be very interested to see what the Humanist Society say about the indoctrination of Islam and various other religions in our schooling. It doesn't seem that they're very keen on that. It just seems to be, from what I can read, that they're interested in having a go at Christians, which is something that they seem to do quite a lot of. So is there anything else you want me to bring out on that, Godfrey?
Yeah, I'd just like to explore the ramifications of this, because I have some legal training in my professional life, although I was never a lawyer, but it incorporated legal training and the principles of English law and common law and so on and so forth. So I'm not a complete layman
Yeah.
in these matters, but it seems to me that although if the Supreme Court have referred only to Christianity, it seems to me that certainly you cannot avoid this concept in Islam or indeed any other religion. You cannot have, one side. You can't teach Christianity at schools, but you can have faith schools if they're Islamic,
Yeah.
or Hindu, or
Yeah.
Sikh, or anything else. Now, okay, let's just have a little bit of a look at Northern Ireland. And nothing you've told me, and nothing when I've briefly looked at the judgment would support this. But I do know, I have a little bit of experience of Northern Ireland. But this obviously is going to apply to Protestants as well as Catholics, as it clearly must.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, my experience in Northern Ireland was the Catholics were very much more stronger, as it were, in their teaching of the Christian faith than perhaps the Protestants were. But that's only a very sort of surface. This is actually, ironically, counterintuitively, brings the Catholics and the Protestants, I would have thought, in Northern Ireland together,
Yeah,
which in
I would
its own
agree
right
with
is no bad thing. But I don't understand how it could not apply to other religions or faith schools, so on and so forth. So it would
that. I mean,
have to, would it not, be a prosecution? There would have to be some kind of prosecution if Christianity continued to be taught in a Northern Irish school, because that would create in common law a precedent, which I would have thought would have made the teaching of Islam in school equally impossible by
yeah.
nature of the definition.
Yeah, I agree. And not only that, we're also forgetting something fundamental here, is that Christianity is a protected minority group as well, according to EU human rights law. So I'm not quite sure how this all like fits together. I mean, the Humanist Society's going on about it doesn't teach pluralism. And so let's look quick look at what pluralism is, which is the belief that a society should should allow for the coexistence of diverse groups with different interests, belief, and lifestyles. Well, most RE lessons would be teaching that anyway. When I did RE at school, we studied about Islam, we studied about Hinduism and various other faiths, and we studied about Christianity. So I don't understand why they would be, again, picking specifically on Christianity. And as you say, what about schools that are predominantly Jewish, and they're teaching Judaism? What about schools that are for predominantly Muslim people? What about schools that have a Christian ethos in classical education and want to promote that? This is another thing that's kind of irking me with modern day liberalism, is that we always seem to be kowtowing to the minority, and the majority have to stomach it. And this is another example of where the minority wins the case and the majority lose.
It's interesting that you make the observation, quite legitimate observation, that they're trying to teach it on if you will, a non-faith basis. They're trying to argue, if you would, I would say, a scientific view, and that it should be encompassed in that scientific view. However, of course, if we look at, as you say, transgender, if we look at climate change, if we look at all these other things, they do not challenge the concept of the scientific view, which is largely wrong on these subjects. So they seem to have, these humanists seem to have one rule for one, and one rule for everybody else. None of this actually stacks up. And I'm certainly concerned. I don't know what your view is, Chris, on this. I'm uh, I'm an old man now. I'm nearer 80 than I am 70. But there's one thing I've noticed with lawyers, that they really have no concept of law, or justice, or the principles of justice, or even the principles of English law. Or do they know anything about the Toleration Acts of 1689? They don't seem to know. They don't seem to be men of a great depth or breadth of education. I'm not suggesting that some of them didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge, but I don't regard that as an education anymore. That's an attendance. They attended there, and their
Yeah,
view really doesn't seem to have any deep justice. And most lawyers, before they get to the Supreme Court, one interest they have is fees. They're in
yeah,
the legal game for fees, and nobody understood them more than Charles Dickens with Dodson and Fogg. Now these chaps get to the top of the tree, which the Supreme Court is, with actually no concept of what law is for. And English law, and the principle of English law or Scottish law, is a shield for the citizen. It's a shield for the citizen. It is not a stick with which to beat him. And this is something fundamentally they don't understand. So one might argue, and I don't know the depth of the people on the Supreme Court, but I smell the nasty whiff of Fabianism here as well, which of
yeah,
course is
yeah,
rampant in the. So now here's an interesting thing as well. This kind of persecution, generally speaking, has the opposite effect. Because people get very cross with that kind of thing, and it actually strengthens people's faith, or certain strengthens people's attitude to these matters. But so, what's your view? What's your feedback from other people on this? You must. I know it was very new, because I only just found out about it when my producer told me yesterday. What's the general feeling amongst other people of other faiths, perhaps, or different splinters of faith, Methodism, Catholicism, so on and so forth?
Well, just from when the post that I put up yesterday, um, people are really angry about it, and it's again, it's not even a thin edge of the wedge. I mean, we're well into the wedge now, and if it happens in Northern Ireland, it will likely seep through eventually to into the UK. But I do think, the Overton window, as they call it, has gone so far now that people are not putting up with this anymore. Um, and people are seeing through this smoke screen. This is just blatant persecution through lawfare. Where we get humanists that saying, well, when you come to religion, it must be done with critical thinking, etc. They're forgetting that there used to be three classical schools of thought, which was philosophy, science, and theology, because each of those categories answered different questions about the human condition. And so by saying, no, everything must be the lens of the universe must only be looked at through the lens of science is a folly, because science doesn't answer the questions of why am I here? What is my purpose? What is my reason? When we're looking at the universe through purely materiality, it doesn't actually answer the questions of the spirit and of God and of the soul. And so, again, humanism I find to be very two dimensional in its approach. And at the end of the day, as you quite rightly pointed out, this really comes down to Fabianism. And Fabianism are very articulate and very to the point of what they're trying to achieve, which is to destroy Western civilization in respect to Christianity being its foundation. They want to bring in a humanist type government with a Mohammedan based culture around it. That's what they want to do. At least that was certainly the papers that first came out of the Fabian Society and part of their big goal and their dream, so to speak. So again, we're seeing this now playing out. And see, this is the thing that I think is going to push this too far the other way, is that I believe that if Christians are not careful and don't get involved in this media war, what will happen is there'll be people on the streets that will say, no, Christianity is a British religion, and therefore we're going to fight for it. And then we'll end up with Christian sectarianism, which is equally dangerous as well. We don't want that. And so, the pendulum will swing both ways. And so, as Christians, we have to be on the ball with this stuff, and we have to call it out, and we have to make people aware of it. Because if we don't, the pendulum will swing to another extreme, which I think is just as dangerous.
It seems to me also that it's interesting that we have what is supposed to be nominally a Christian society in this country, in Great Britain.
Yeah.
It is supposed to be a Christian country, and it's to the extent that it is endorsed. It's endorsed by law and endorsed by government. Otherwise, why have we got 22 bishops in the House of Lords? As I say, you can't have it both ways. Although, of course, the Christian bishops that we have in the House of Lords are chosen politically and put forward, and with the risk of sounding quite controversial, it is my view that most bishops, Church of England bishops in the House of Lords, are agnostics. Because I've never heard them ever actually take any interest in actually preaching the gospel or sticking up for global Christianity in either Nigeria or anywhere else. And of course, the supreme head of the Church of England, of course, is King Charles III, who certainly has no interest at all and doesn't even pretend to have any interest in Christianity. He has a
Yeah.
great deal of interest in Islam. So we don't seem to have anybody really sticking up for the concept of Christianity who are close to the levers of power.
No, no, I'd agree. But we are seeing changes. So in parties, whatever you call them a party, like Advance UK, Reform, we're seeing quite a lot of, and UKIP as well, a very strong Christian influence in that side of things, which I think is good, is a refreshing change. But when I look at the House of Parliament as it currently stands, we've got, I'm not being horrible to liberals, but we've got a lot of what I'd call far left liberals. You've got the Green Party, which is as far left as you can go, I think. You've got the Lib Dems, which are quite not so far left, but certainly in that camp. You've got a lot of Conservatives, which are very liberal leaning, and then you've got the Labour, who we know where they stand. And so that's also a problem, that most of our Parliament, and as you say with the House of Lords, again, a lot of them there very liberal minded. It's a very difficult time at this juncture in history for Christianity. But I think things will change, but I don't think it will come top down. I think it will be a groundswell of such proportions that it will change that which is going on at the top. But it will take time, and I see this as a long-term generational thing. If we want to see this nation turn back to being a Christian nation, whether you see it as a cultural Christian nation or a nation that is fully alive with faith, we need to see the long-term plan here, which is the next 10 to 20 years. We need to bring Christianity back into our education, back into our politics, back into the media.
It's an interesting concept, really. We go down a rabbit hole, really, but one might argue that Christianity started out as a bottom-up Christianity. It's then the establishment sort of got hold of it, and we sort of built wonderful, beautiful buildings, great churches. But they were really then started, it morphed, didn't it, into sort of top, especially in the Catholic faith, certainly, and one would argue the Anglican faith here from the 1600s. It then become very much top down, and we saw a pushback, again, this rabbit hole, one might argue in the 1800s with Methodism and things like that, with people pushing back at what was perceived as the establishment church. But it's not even establishment now. Christianity isn't even establishment. It's been
Right.
abandoned by our bishops. It's been abandoned by the head of the Church of England, King Charles III, who is frankly useless. But then he's useless in other departments as well, sadly.
Yeah.
So yes, it's got to be bottom up. But of course, then the clergy and the empty churches, sadly, show that the cupboard is bare when it comes to personalities, perhaps the great preachers of yesteryear. And one might argue, not my cup of tea, if you will, but the Billy Grahams of North America in the 60s and so on and so forth. If people are going to come to this faith, you're right, they're going to have to stand up and be counted, or it's just going to disappear. And of course, there is a very strong argument that that Sharia law is en route. We know that in
Exactly.
local government, of course, most or huge number of mayors of very big cities are Islamic, and so on and so forth. So we are under threat. And of course, the paradox is rather that it's not so, one would argue, in Africa, where your African bishops or your African cardinals, depending on which branch of the Christian faith there is, are really um, drum bangers. They're really deep down Christians of deep faith. I sometimes
Yes.
wonder if we should not have an African Archbishop of Canterbury who actually believes in God. Wouldn't that be a new idea?
Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful? It'd be so refreshing. It would be so refreshing to actually see the Church of England lead the way on faith. You know, I when I first came to faith, I was in the Anglican Church, so I have a deep love and respect for the Anglican Church. I use the Common Book of Prayer, the Book of Common Prayer, in my daily devotionals. So, it's made a big impact on me. So it really breaks my heart to see what's happened to the C of E of late. But the thing is, nature abhors a vacuum, and if we kick out Christianity out of this country, then there's another religion, and I don't mean to be horrible, but or controversial, but would quite gladly take its place. And we're already starting to see that with the rise of Sharia law courts and Sharia councils across our nation, and even ghettoized sectarianism as well. This is just the way nature works. People say, oh no, we just want secularism, we just want humanism. But if you Google how many people in the world are religious, it's well over half of the world. And so humanism just doesn't answer the deep longing need and psyche of a man or a woman in the way that religion does. And so whether you like it or not, faith is going to be a part of Britain. But the question we need to be asking ourselves is, what faith do you want to? Because it will boil down to one of those two. Because if you are using lawfare to persecute Christianity and to denigrate it and to get rid of it, then you will only do one other thing, and that's encourage another faith to take its place. And quite frankly, I don't think that's what Britain wants.
Before we sign off, because we've covered what I wanted to cover, and we'll come back to this. We'll come back to this maybe after Christmas when things have developed a little bit. Um, can I just finish up by asking you, um, at the old Ashridge management course, which I did many years ago, um, when you had a presentation or you had a training session, the thing they used to say, what's the doing thing? What's the doing thing? So when we sign off on this particular clip, what is it that people can actually do of a practical nature? What can they actually do when they think, God, I didn't know about this. This is bloody awful. To whom do I address my concerns? Where do I go with this? How would you suggest, because people like to say, yeah, I get lots of clips. I think, Godfrey, what am I going to do? Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I get the point. What am I going to do? And of course, as an economist, a professional economist and financial man, of course, I've got the answers there. I'd say, well, you do this, or you do that, or do this to save your family, whatever it is. But when it comes to a subject like this, I'm not quite sure where I would point people. Where can we point people to just to start?
Okay, so firstly and foremost, you might not like the first answer, but the first thing is that we must pray. The second thing that we need to do is we need to start really lobbying our local MP and lobbying Parliament. Also, we need to actively engage our Christian faith in the community, whether you get involved in your local school, become a governor, be an influence in some way, because actually the law is on our side when it comes to Christianity, especially in schools. Schools do by law have to have 51% of the curriculum on Christianity and school assemblies. Just a lot of schools opt out of it. So actually the law is on our side in many aspects. So lobby Parliament, lobby your MP, get involved, use media, raise the attention of these cases, and do things like go out and protest marches, make your voice counted, be a number, be there. Don't just sit at home nice and warm drinking your coffee. You've got to stand up, because even if, let's say, people watching this are not Christian necessarily, but they are cultural Christian, in other words, they may not believe in God, but they like the culture that's come about in Britain because of Christianity. You need to understand that without supporting Christianity, your way of life can't exist either. And so this is so important that we have to be engaged. And that means we're going to have to get involved in media, politics, in in education, every which way that we can, even in a small way. If we can build enough on the ground and make this go up, things will change. But the more we are quiet, the more we're silent, the more we allow our Christmas markets to become winter fests and all this thing, the more and more Christianity is going to be marginalized and will be put onto the back burner of history. And I think that will be an absolute horrendous thing to happen to this nation. That's my thoughts.
Well, I agree with you completely. And there's the thing you just finished up with. If you hadn't mentioned it, I was going to mention it. If your local supermarket is trying to suppress the ethos of the Christian celebration, um, and some of them are trying to take away the Christmas away, the words Christmas cake away, just festive cake and all that kind of thing. Um, it's a commercial organization. If you
Yeah,
write
right.
to them, if you write to them, and everyone do that, if they're not happy when you go shopping at Christmas, and everybody watching this will go shopping in some way, if you're not happy with it being called an evergreen tree, or it's called this, that, and the other because they're avoiding the word Christian, write and complain, because they will sell less products, make less profit for their shareholders if you do, notwithstanding some of the suspicious ownerships of some of these big chains, of course, which we all know about. And I'm not going down that rabbit hole just at the moment. But yeah, we've all we've all got to put our shoulder to this particular wheel. Well, Chris, I thank you again. Thank you for coming on and explaining this to on my channel. I'm
That's all
very
right. It's been a
grateful,
privilege.
and we will get back together again as this goes through. This topic goes through. We'll stick together on this and feed each other information and feed it out on the channels. It can only do good. Thank you
Yeah.
again.
Thanks, Godfrey. Thank you.
As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.